6 months had passed since Anna Moretti walked away from a life most women only dreamed about in their darkest fantasies. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, designer clothes that hung in a closet the size of most apartments, dinners at restaurants where menus had no prices and reservations were made months in advance. She left behind champagne that cost more than rent, jewelry boxes filled with diamonds that caught light like trapped stars, and a man who commanded respect with nothing more than his presence in a room. Luca Marino wasn't just wealthy. He was power incarnated, the kind of man whose name made people lower their voices and avert their eyes. In the Italian neighborhood of Lower Manhattan, he was royalty, feared and revered in equal measure. But Anna had learned something crucial during those years at his side. All the luxury in the world couldn't compensate for the absence of emotional honesty. She had grown tired of loving someone who viewed vulnerability as weakness, who confused protection with possession, who believed that providing materially somehow exempted him from connecting emotionally. Luca was magnificent in his strength, devastating in his authority, and absolutely terrified of anything that resembled genuine intimacy. He could orchestrate million-dollar deals with the ease of breathing, could silence a room with a single glance, could inspire loyalty that bordered on religious devotion. But he couldn't tell the woman he loved that he needed her. Not in words that mattered. Not in ways that healed. So Anna left. Not dramatically. Not with screaming matches or thrown objects or ultimatums designed to make him chase her. She simply packed her belongings one Tuesday afternoon while he was handling business, left a note that said only, "I deserve more than this," and moved into a modest studio apartment in Brooklyn that cost a fraction of what Luca spent monthly on cigars. Her friends thought she was insane. Her mother cried for weeks, mourning the loss of security and status. But Anna felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like herself again, unadorned and unguarded, living a life that was smaller in scope but infinitely larger in authenticity. The months that followed were harder than she'd anticipated. There were nights when she missed the weight of his arm around her waist, the intoxicating scent of his cologne mixed with expensive whiskey, the way he'd pull her close in sleep, as if even unconsciously he feared losing her. She missed the security of knowing that no harm would ever reach her while she stood under his protection. She missed the pride in his eyes when she entered a room, the possessive hand at the small of her back, the way he'd lean down to whisper things in Italian that made her blush, regardless of how many times she'd heard them. But she didn't miss the loneliness of lying beside someone who kept his heart locked behind walls of pride and tradition. She didn't miss the frustration of loving someone who thought providing and protecting were sufficient substitutes for genuine emotional presence. Anna built a new life piece by piece. She got a job at a small art gallery in Williamsburg, something she'd always wanted to do but never could, because Luca preferred her available, present, waiting. She made friends who knew nothing about her past, who saw her simply as Anna, not as Luca Marino's woman, not as arm candy for a powerful man, just as herself. She took long walks through Brooklyn neighborhoods, ate cheap Thai food at 2 a.m, went to poetry readings in basement bars, danced in crowded clubs where nobody knew her name. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. This life without safety nets, without security details shadowing her movements, without the weight of being associated with someone whose reputation preceded him into every space. But then her body started betraying her in small, insidious ways. Exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, headaches that arrived without warning and lingered for days, a persistent pain in her abdomen that she ignored until she couldn't anymore. She told herself it was stress, the natural consequence of rebuilding a life from scratch, of working full-time and paying bills and managing everything alone. She convinced herself that it would pass, that she just needed to eat better, sleep more, take vitamins, practice self-care. But the symptoms intensified rather than diminished, until finally a coworker found her doubled over in the gallery bathroom, pale and trembling, and insisted on calling an ambulance despite Anna's protests. The emergency room was a special kind of hell, fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead. the smell of disinfectant failing to mask something darker underneath, the constant beeping of machines monitoring lives hanging in balance. Anna sat on a hard plastic chair for 3 hours before anyone examined her, answering the same questions repeatedly, trying not to think about how different this would be if she'd still been with Luca. He would have had her in a private room within minutes, the best doctors money could summon, specialists flying in from wherever they were needed. But that wasn't her life anymore, and she'd made peace with that choice. Or so she thought, until a young doctor with tired eyes and a kind smile delivered news that made her previous life seem suddenly, devastatingly irrelevant. "We need to run more tests," he said, his voice gentle but professionally distant. "There's a mass we're concerned about. Could be nothing. Could be something we need to address surgically. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but I also won't lie. We need to investigate the possibility of a tumor." The word hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Tumor. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight, such terrifying implications. Anna heard herself laughing, a short, bitter sound that surprised them both. Here she was, finally living authentically, finally free from the golden cage of Luca's protection, and her own body was staging a rebellion that might render all of it meaningless. The irony was so sharp it could cut. She'd spent years afraid of what loving Luca might cost her. Her independence, her identity, her sense of self, only to discover that the real threat had been growing inside her all along, patient and silent and utterly indifferent to her choices. They admitted her for observation and further testing. The hospital room was small and sterile, nothing like the luxury she'd once taken for granted, but there was something almost comforting about its simplicity. No pretense here, no performance required. Just her and her fear and the slow drip of saline through an IV that anchored her to this new, frightening reality. Anna lay in the narrow bed, watching the fluid fall, drop by methodical drop, thinking about all the things she'd worried about in her life that suddenly seemed absurdly trivial. Arguments about Luca's work, frustrations about his emotional unavailability, concerns about losing herself in his shadow. What did any of it matter now, faced with the possibility that time itself might be limited? Night fell outside her window, the city lights creating a constellation against the darkness. Anna thought about her new life, the one she'd fought so hard to build. The gallery job she loved, the friendships she'd cultivated, the independence she'd reclaimed. Would she get to keep any of it? Or was this the universe's cruel joke, giving her freedom only to potentially take away everything that made freedom worth having? She thought about her mother, who would say this was karma for leaving a good man. She thought about her friends, who would rally around her with support and sympathy, but couldn't change the diagnosis. She thought about Luca, and that's when something inside her cracked. She'd promised herself she wouldn't reach out to him. Pride demanded it. Self-respect insisted upon it. She'd left him. Going back now, even in crisis, would undermine everything that departure had meant. But as she lay there in the dark, facing the possibility of surgery and uncertain outcomes, and a future that might be measured in months rather than years, Anna realized that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Some part of her needed him to know. Not to rescue her. She'd learned to rescue herself. Not to fix this. Even Luca's considerable power couldn't negotiate with biology. Just to know. Because whatever had existed between them, whatever had ultimately proven insufficient, it had also been real, and real things, even when they end, deserve acknowledgement. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her phone, and she hated herself a little for the weakness, even as she understood its inevitability. His number was still there, never deleted despite her determination to move forward cleanly. Her thumb hovered over his name for a long moment, and she could almost hear his voice in her head. That particular mix of authority and affection he'd used only with her, when they were alone and he allowed himself to be something other than invincible. She pressed call before she could second-guess herself, and the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Anna almost hung up, suddenly convinced this was a mistake, that reopening this door would undo all the healing she'd managed. But then, his voice came through the line, rough with concern even in that single word. Anna. Not a question, not a greeting. Just her name, spoken like a prayer and a curse combined. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't find words adequate to this moment, this reversal, this unwilling surrender. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 6 months of absence, and all the things they'd never properly said to each other. Finally, she managed to force words past the tightness in her throat, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will, because she wouldn't let him hear her break. Not yet. Not over the phone. I'm at Brooklyn Methodist, she said quietly. In the hospital. They're running tests for something that might require surgery. I don't need you to do anything, Luca. She paused, searching for honesty. I thought you should know. The line went silent for 3 heartbeats, and Anna could picture him exactly, standing wherever he was, his body going absolutely still, the way it did when processing information that mattered, his mind already working through implications and responses, calculating angles and solutions. Then, in a voice that somehow managed to be both controlled and breaking simultaneously, he asked, What room number? Luca, you don't have to. What? Room? Number? She told him, and the line went dead. Anna stared at her phone, feeling something complicated twist in her chest. She'd expected questions, maybe criticism about why she'd waited so long to call, perhaps even cool politeness that would keep appropriate distance between their separate lives. She hadn't expected the immediate shift to action, the dropping of everything else, the single-minded focus that characterized Luca when something he valued was threatened. For a moment, she let herself feel what she'd been suppressing, relief that she wasn't completely alone in this, that someone who'd once known her more intimately than anyone else was on his way. Then guilt followed immediately, because she'd left him precisely to avoid this kind of dependence, this gravitational pull toward letting him manage everything. Anna tried to prepare herself for his arrival, but she looked terrible and knew it. Hospital gown that stripped away any dignity, hair unwashed and tangled, face pale without makeup, dark circles under her eyes that spoke to weeks of not sleeping properly. Part of her wanted to care, wanted to somehow make herself presentable before he saw her like this, diminished and vulnerable in ways he'd never witnessed. But mostly she just felt tired. Tired of pretending strength she didn't feel. Tired of holding everything together alone. Tired of being brave. Let him see her like this, stripped of pretense and polish. Maybe it would finally make him understand why she'd left. Because she'd needed to be real, messy, imperfect, and he'd only ever wanted the carefully curated version. 18 minutes later, the door to her room opened. Luca Marino entered the way he entered every space, with absolute confidence, as if the room had been waiting specifically for his arrival. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Anna's monthly rent, the jacket fitting his broad shoulders with the precision that only bespoke tailoring achieved. His dark hair was styled in that perfect slicked-back way that had always made her fingers itch to mess it up, and his white dress shirt was open at the collar, revealing the edge of an intricate design inked into his throat, artistic lines that continued down beneath the fabric, mapping stories across his skin that she'd once traced with her fingertips. A Patek Philippe watch caught the fluorescent light at his wrist, and his hands, those hands that could be so gentle despite their capacity for violence, were clenched at his sides. But it was his eyes that caught her. Dark brown, nearly black in certain lights, usually so controlled and unreadable that even his closest associates couldn't predict his thoughts. Now they were wide with something that looked terrifyingly close to fear, scanning her face and the medical equipment surrounding her with an intensity that made her heart clench. He stood frozen in the doorway. This man who commanded rooms with his presence, who made grown men nervous with a glance, who never seemed uncertain about anything. He looked completely out of place in this sterile hospital environment, like a lion suddenly transported into a birdcage, magnificent and powerful, and somehow trapped by circumstances he couldn't dominate through sheer force of will. "Cristo," he breathed. And that single word, Italian slipping through despite his generally flawless English, told her more about his state of mind than any lengthy declaration could have. He moved toward her then, crossing the small room in 3 strides, and Anna noticed what she'd never seen before. His hands were shaking. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely trembling. Luca Marino, who'd faced down rival families and federal investigations without flinching, who negotiated million-dollar deals with hands steady as stone, whose reputation was built partially on his absolute physical control. His hands were shaking as he approached her hospital bed. "Don't," she said softly, stopping him before he could reach for her. "Don't do that thing where you try to fix everything. I didn't call you so you could solve this, Luca." "Then why did you call?" His voice was rougher than usual, scraped raw with emotions he was clearly struggling to contain. Anna smiled, and she knew it probably looked sad, maybe a little bitter. "Because despite everything, despite the fact that we weren't good together, despite all the reasons I left, you're still the person I thought about when I got scared. Isn't that fucked up?" He flinched slightly at the language, which would have been amusing under other circumstances. For all his involvement in morally ambiguous business, Luca had always been oddly traditional about certain things. He didn't like hearing her curse, preferred her softly spoken, had rules about propriety that belonged to a different era. But he didn't comment, just pulled the uncomfortable plastic visitor's chair closer to her bed and sat down heavily, as if standing had become suddenly exhausting. They stared at each other for a long moment, 6 months of absence hanging between them like smoke. "Tell me what's happening," he said finally, and it wasn't a command. It was a plea, though he'd probably die before admitting it. So Anna told him. About the symptoms she'd been ignoring, the emergency room visit, the tests, and the concerning mass, and the word tumor that kept echoing in her head like a death knell. She kept her voice clinical, detached, as if she were describing someone else's medical crisis rather than her own. Luca listened without interrupting, but she watched his jaw tighten progressively, watched his hands curl into fists against his thighs, watched him struggle with the fundamental helplessness of this situation. When she finished, silence settled over them again, heavier now with the weight of everything she'd revealed. "When do you get results?" he asked. "Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. They're not exactly rushing for someone without premium insurance." Something dangerous flickered across his face. "Give me the doctor's name." "No. Anna." "No, Luca." She held his gaze steadily. "I didn't tell you so you could throw money at this or intimidate people or make calls to whoever you know on the hospital board. I told you because—" She paused, searching for words that would make him understand. "Because I needed you to know. That's all. Just to know." He looked like he wanted to argue, like every instinct in his body was screaming at him to take action, to leverage his considerable influence, to ensure she got the best possible care regardless of the rules or protocols standing in the way. Anna could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes, which doctors owed him favors, which administrators could be persuaded or pressured, how quickly he could have her transferred to a private facility with specialists. But something in her expression must have communicated her seriousness, because he slowly, visibly, forced himself to back down. "This is killing me," he said quietly, with more raw honesty than she'd heard from him in the entire time they'd been together. Sitting here, unable to do anything. "Welcome to how I felt for 3 years," Anna replied, and there was no anger in it, just statement of fact. "Watching you close yourself off, unable to reach you, powerless to make you let me in. The hit landed. She saw it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way he looked away briefly before forcing his eyes back to hers. They'd never talked about this properly. Never had the conversation about why she'd left because he'd been traveling when she'd moved out, and she'd deliberately avoided any contact afterward, knowing that seeing him would weaken her resolve. But here they were now, trapped in this small room by circumstances neither of them could control, with nowhere to hide from truths they'd both been avoiding. "I protected you," Luca said, and there was something almost defensive in his tone. "I gave you everything." "Except yourself," Anna interrupted gently. "You gave me safety and luxury and devotion in every way except the one that actually mattered. You could kill for me, but you couldn't cry with me. You could buy me anything in the world, but you couldn't tell me you were scared of losing me. You treated me like something precious to be protected, but never like an equal who could handle your reality. My reality isn't something anyone should have to handle," he said roughly. "What I do, who I am, it's not clean, Anna. It's not pretty. I kept those parts separate because you deserved better than being dragged into darkness. But don't you see? That's exactly the problem." She shifted in the bed, ignoring the pull of the IV in her arm. "You decided what I could handle instead of letting me choose. You built walls around the parts of yourself you thought were too ugly or dangerous or complicated, and then wondered why I felt like I was only getting half of you. I didn't need you to be perfect, Luca. I needed you to be real." He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how to be real, like you wanted. My father taught me that showing weakness gets you killed in my world. That vulnerability is just another word for target. That if you love something, you protect it by keeping distance between it and the things that could destroy it. I thought..." He stopped, jaw working as he struggled with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I thought if you saw everything, all of me, you'd leave. So instead I left because you wouldn't let me see," Anna said softly. "The irony is kind of devastating, isn't it?" Something that might have been a laugh escaped him, though it sounded more like pain. "You always were smarter than me. Not smarter, just different. You think with your head, Luca. Everything's strategy and protection and control. I need..." She paused, looking for the right words. "I need to feel things, even when they're messy or scary. And you couldn't give me that because you'd spent your whole life learning not to feel anything at all." The truth of it hung between them, sharp and undeniable. They'd loved each other. Anna didn't doubt that, even now. But love alone hadn't been enough to bridge the fundamental difference in how they moved through the world. He'd been shaped by violence and tradition, and the constant necessity of appearing invulnerable. She'd been shaped by art and emotion, and the belief that connection required exposure, risk, the willingness to be wounded. They'd been beautiful together in some ways, devastating in others, and ultimately incompatible in the way that mattered most. "I should go," Luca said finally, though he made no move to stand. "Let you rest." "Yeah," Anna agreed, though she didn't want him to leave. Despite everything, despite all the valid reasons they'd separated, there was comfort in his presence. The familiarity of someone who'd once known her body as well as his own, who'd memorized her preferences and patterns, who'd been the person she'd fallen asleep next to for 3 years. "Thank you for coming." He did stand then, slowly, as if his body was reluctant despite his words. At the door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Anna." "Yeah?" "I'm going to be here tomorrow, when you get the results. You don't have to see me if you don't want to, but I'll be in the waiting room, just in case you need anything." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. leaving her alone with the persistent beep of monitors and the smell of antiseptic and a confused tangle of emotions she was too exhausted to unravel. Anna closed her eyes, feeling tears finally leak from the corners even as she smiled slightly. Funny how pain still gets your attention, she thought. Funny how crisis strips away all the careful distance you've built. Funny how the person you left is still the person you call when everything falls apart. Anna didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind spun through worst-case scenarios with the relentless creativity of anxiety. Cancer, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, death. The words cycled through her consciousness like a mantra from hell, each one carrying implications that branched into 1,000 smaller fears. Who would take care of her if she needed treatment? How would she afford it? Would she lose her job? Her apartment? Would she end up back in her mother's house, sick and dependent, proving right everyone who'd said leaving Luca was the stupidest decision she'd ever made? The darkness of the hospital room seemed to press in on her, making everything feel more ominous, more final. She watched the sky gradually lighten through her window, watched the city wake up and move into another day that might or might not contain her future. Nurses came and went with practiced efficiency, checking vitals and adjusting things and offering sympathy that was genuine, but worn thin by repetition. How many people had they delivered bad news to? How many lives had they watched change irrevocably in rooms just like this one? Anna wondered if you ever got used to it, if there was a point where suffering became just another task to manage, rather than a tragedy to witness. She hoped not. She hoped somewhere in the machinery of modern medicine there was still space for seeing patients as people, rather than problems to solve. Morning brought the young doctor from the emergency room, now accompanied by an older woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, who introduced herself as Dr. Rodriguez, Chief of Oncology. The title made Anna's stomach drop, even though she tried to maintain composure. They pulled up chairs, their faces professionally neutral in that way that could mean anything or nothing, and Anna found herself holding her breath, waiting for her life to either continue or fundamentally change direction. Dr. Rodriguez spoke first, her voice kind but direct. The tests show a mass approximately 4 centimeters in diameter on your left ovary. It's concerning in size and appearance, which is why we moved quickly to get you these results. However, and here she paused, and Anna's heart stopped entirely. The biopsy results came back negative for malignancy. What you have is a large benign teratoma, which sounds terrifying but is actually quite manageable. We'll need to remove it surgically to prevent complications, but this is not cancer, Ms. Moretti. You're going to be fine. The words hit Anna with physical force. Not cancer. Benign. Fine. She felt tears spill over before she could stop them, a sob escaping that was equal parts relief and release of all the fear she'd been holding compressed in her chest. The doctors waited patiently while she cried, offering tissues and gentle reassurances, explaining details about the surgery and recovery that Anna barely processed through the roar of gratitude in her ears. She was going to be fine. She wasn't dying. The future she'd been so afraid of losing was still hers to build. When they finally left, promising to schedule surgery within the week, Anna sat in the sudden silence of her room and felt almost dizzy with relief. She wanted to call someone, share the news, hear another voice celebrating this reprieve with her. But it was early, and her friends would be at work, and her mother would make it about how she should reconcile with Luca now that the crisis was over. Her hand hovered over her phone, and she realized with a start that there was someone else who needed to know, someone who'd promised to be in the waiting room, someone who'd looked at her last night with more genuine fear than she'd ever seen in his eyes. Anna found herself standing before she consciously decided to move, padding across the cold hospital floor in her thin gown and hospital slippers, pulling her IV pole behind her like some sort of mechanical companion. The waiting room was down one floor, a depressing space with uncomfortable chairs and fluorescent lighting and magazines from 3 years ago. She spotted him immediately, even though the room was fairly crowded. Luca Marino stood out anywhere, but especially here among the worried families and exhausted visitors. He was standing by the windows, still in the same suit from last night, though it was now rumpled in ways that suggested he hadn't gone home, staring out at the morning traffic with his phone pressed to his ear. He must have sensed her presence because he turned mid-sentence, his eyes finding her across the room with unerring accuracy. Whatever he'd been saying died on his lips. He ended the call without pleasantries, pocketing his phone as he crossed toward her with long strides, his expression cycling rapidly through concern and confusion before landing on something that looked like desperate hope. They met in the middle of the waiting room, and Anna realized distantly that people were staring. This was quite the scene, the beautiful man in the expensive suit and the crying woman in a hospital gown. But she couldn't bring herself to care. "It's benign," she said, and her voice broke on the words. "Not cancer. Just something they need to remove surgically. But I'm going to be fine." For a moment, Luca just stared at her, as if he couldn't quite process the information. Then something in him seemed to crack open. All that careful control he maintained so religiously simply breaking apart. He closed the remaining distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. Anna felt his whole body shaking and realized with shock that he was crying, silently, with the same iron discipline he applied to everything else, but definitely crying. She wrapped her arms around him, and they stood there in the middle of the hospital waiting room, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck finally reaching shore. "Cristo," he breathed against her hair, lapsing into Italian the way he did when emotions overwhelmed English. "Cristo, Anna, I thought, when I saw you standing there—" "I know," she whispered. "I know." They stood like that for a long time, long enough that Anna's legs started trembling from exhaustion, and Luca must have felt it because he gently guided her to a chair, sitting beside her, but keeping one arm around her shoulders, as if he couldn't quite bear to stop touching her. People continued to stare, but Anna didn't care anymore, and Luca had never cared what anyone thought about anything. They sat in silence, her head on his shoulder, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her arm, both of them breathing through the adrenaline crash that follows genuine fear. "You stayed all night," Anna said eventually, stating the obvious just to hear him confirm it. "Where else would I be?" Luca's voice was rough, scraped raw by emotions he usually kept buried so deep they never saw daylight. "You think I could go home? Go to work? Pretend this wasn't happening?" "You haven't slept. Neither have you." He turned his head to look at her properly, and up close she could see the exhaustion in his face, the redness in his eyes that spoke to more than just lost sleep. "Anna, when you called yesterday, when I heard your voice saying you were in the hospital—" "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't do the what-if spiral. I'm fine. We're fine." "Are we?" he asked quietly, and there was something raw in the question, something that suggested they were suddenly talking about more than just her health scare. "Because 6 months ago you walked away, and you were right to do it. I am. Everything you said. Closed off. Controlling. Too fucking afraid of showing weakness to actually be present with you. And I don't know if that's something I can change, Anna. I don't know if I know how." She was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer carefully, because this conversation mattered in ways that went beyond easy reassurances. "I don't know either," she admitted. "Yesterday, when I called you, I told myself it was just about needing you to know, about acknowledging what we'd had even though it was over. But sitting here now with you, I don't know what this means. If it means anything beyond two people who used to love each other finding comfort in crisis." "Used to?" Luca repeated, and there was something sharp in his voice, something almost wounded. Anna pulled back slightly to look at him properly. "Did I stop loving you? Is that what you're asking?" "No, I left because I loved you, and it was killing me to be with someone who couldn't let me all the way in. But love doesn't just evaporate, Luca. It just becomes something you carry instead of something you live in. He absorbed that, his jaw working as he processed. Around them, the waiting room continued its normal rhythms. People arriving for appointments, families gathering for updates. The constant human drama of illness and recovery playing out in hushed conversations and worried faces. But in their small bubble of space, everything felt suspended, balanced on the edge of something that could tip either direction. "I want to try," Luca said finally, and the words sounded like they'd been dragged up from somewhere deep and unexplored. "I don't know if I can be what you need, but Christo, Anna, watching you lie in that hospital bed, thinking about losing you not because you chose to leave, but because time ran out. It clarified some things. All that armor I wear, all that distance I keep, all those walls I've built, they didn't protect me from anything. I've been miserable for 6 months. Not because my life changed materially, but because you weren't in it. And if I've learned anything from this, it's that being alone and safe feels a hell of a lot like being alone and dying inside." Anna felt tears threatening again. But these were different. Complicated, bittersweet, tangled up with hope and fear in equal measure. "What does trying look like?" she asked. "Because I can't go back to how things were, Luca. I can't live in your penthouse and wear your gifts and be the beautiful woman on your arm while you keep your actual self locked away. If we're going to do this, if there's even a possibility of doing this, things have to be different." "I know," he said, and the acceptance in his voice suggested he'd been thinking about this for longer than just the past 24 hours. "I know it can't be like before. I'm not asking you to come back to that life. I'm asking—" He paused, seeming to struggle with vulnerability even now. "I'm asking if we could start over. Differently. Without all the performance and pretense. Without me trying to protect you from reality by keeping you separate from it. Without the luxury as compensation for emotional absence. Just us, whatever that looks like." "That's terrifying," Anna said honestly. "Yeah," Luca agreed. "It really is." They sat in silence again, but it felt different now, charged with possibility rather than weighed down by past failures. Anna thought about what he was offering, what she'd been asking for during their entire relationship. Not perfection, not transformation into someone he wasn't, just willingness. Willingness to try, to be uncomfortable, to let her see the messy, complicated reality he spent so much energy concealing. It wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was something they'd never had before. Acknowledgement that change was necessary, that both of them needed to approach things differently. "I have surgery in a few days," Anna said finally, "and recovery after that. I'll need help, probably, which is humiliating because I've spent 6 months proving I could manage alone." "Let me help," Luca said immediately. "Not because you can't handle it yourself, but because I want to. Because maybe that's where we start, with me being present for the unglamorous parts. The hospital visits and recovery and reality that isn't Instagram-worthy. The stuff I used to keep you separate from because I thought protection and provision were enough. No more penthouse," Anna said firmly. "No more designer everything and 5-star restaurants and pretending we live in some fairy tale. If we do this, we do it in the real world." "My apartment has a kitchen I don't know how to use," Luca offered, and there was something almost vulnerable in the admission. This man who commanded empires confessing he couldn't cook for himself. "You could teach me. We could figure it out together." Despite everything, Anna laughed. The image of Luca Marino attempting to navigate a kitchen was almost absurd enough to lighten the weight of this conversation. "You're serious about this," she said, statement rather than question. "I've never been more serious about anything," he replied. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know you had every right to leave and every reason to never look back. but watching you in that hospital room yesterday, thinking about all the things I never said. Anna, I don't want to be the man who realizes too late what he had. I want to be someone worthy of you choosing to stay. And if that means learning to be vulnerable and honest and present in ways that scare the hell out of me, then that's what I'll do. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired with words alone, no matter how sincere they sounded. Actions would have to follow, consistency over time, proof that this wasn't just fear talking, wasn't just the crisis making him think he wanted something he'd ultimately resent having to provide. Still, looking at him now, rumpled and exhausted and more openly emotional than she'd ever seen him, Anna felt something shift. Not certainty, not confidence, but possibility. The faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, almost losing something could teach you how to hold it properly. Okay, she said softly. We can try. But Luca, I need you to understand. Trying means actually doing the work, not just saying you'll do it. It means therapy, probably. Couples counseling at minimum. It means you learning to communicate instead of just deciding things unilaterally. It means me being honest when you're slipping back into old patterns, and you not getting defensive when I call it out. It means both of us being willing to fail sometimes because we're learning something new. I can do that, he said, and then corrected himself. I'll learn to do that, with you. They sat together until a nurse came looking for Anna, reminding her that she needed to return to her room for more monitoring. Luca walked with her, steadying her when she wobbled slightly from exhaustion, his hand warm and solid at her elbow. At the door to her room, they paused, and Anna looked up at him. This complicated man who'd captured her heart years ago and never quite released it, even when she'd walked away. When you come back, she said, come as yourself. Not the version of you that you think I want to see. Not the polished, controlled, unshakable boss everyone else gets. Just Luca, the real person underneath all that armor. He nodded slowly, and she saw both fear and determination in his expression. That's going to be messy, he warned. Good, Anna replied with a small smile. I've always preferred real to perfect anyway. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days away. Anna used the time to organize what she could of her life, calling the gallery to explain she'd need medical leave, paying bills in advance, making sure her studio apartment was clean in case someone needed to water her plants or check on things. She felt simultaneously hyper-organized and completely unprepared, managing logistics while trying not to think too hard about the fact that people would be cutting her open, that anesthesia carried risks, that even routine procedures sometimes had complications. She'd Googled the surgery against her better judgment and then immediately regretted it, spiraling into medical horror stories until she forced herself to close the laptop and focus on literally anything else. Luca called every evening at 8 o'clock, which she realized was probably when he allowed himself to stop working. The conversations were awkward at first, neither of them quite sure how to navigate this new territory they'd agreed to explore. They'd never had trouble talking during their relationship, but that had been different. Then, Anna had done most of the talking while Luca listened and occasionally shared surface-level details about his day. Now, tentatively, he was trying something different. He told her about a meeting that had gone poorly, admitted he'd lost his temper at someone who'd been disrespectful, confessed he'd spent 20 minutes afterward feeling guilty about it because he was trying to be less reactive. Small things, maybe, but for Luca, they represented seismic shifts in willingness to be seen as imperfect. Tell me something you're afraid of, Anna said on Tuesday night, testing the waters of this new honesty. He was quiet for a long moment. Losing control, he finally admitted. Not in the business sense. I'm not afraid of deals falling through or competitors making moves. I mean losing control of myself. Feeling things so intensely that I can't think strategically. That's what scared me about us. about how much I loved you. It made me feel vulnerable in ways I'd spent my whole life learning to avoid. That's not weakness, Luca, Anna said softly. That's just being human. In my world, being human gets you killed. Maybe, she allowed. But closing yourself off from everything also kills you, just more slowly. You become this hollow thing, powerful and successful, and completely alone inside your own head. Is that really better? He didn't answer directly, but she heard him breathing on the other end of the line, considering. What are you afraid of? He asked, turning the question back on her. Anna thought about lying, offering some surface-level fear that wouldn't expose too much. But that wasn't the point of this, was it? If she wanted him to be vulnerable, she had to model it too. I'm afraid that 6 months from now, we'll be right back where we started, she said honestly. That this willingness to change is just temporary, driven by crisis, and once things stabilize, you'll default back to walls and control and emotional distance. I'm afraid that I'll have opened myself up again just to get hurt in exactly the same way. That's fair, Luca said quietly. I'm afraid of that too. Not because I don't want to change, but because I've been doing things one way for 35 years. Those patterns are deep, Anna. What if I can't break them? Then we won't work, Anna replied, and the bluntness of it hung between them. But at least we'll have tried for real this time, instead of just hoping the problem would resolve itself without either of us having to do the hard work. Wednesday night, Luca showed up at the hospital unannounced. Anna was watching terrible reality television, trying to distract herself from pre-surgery anxiety, when he appeared in her doorway holding 2 coffee cups and a bag that smelled like expensive takeout. He looked different, still well-dressed because that was apparently genetically encoded, but the suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans and a black Henley that revealed more of the artistic designs inked across his collarbone and throat. His hair was slightly less perfect than usual, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there was something in his expression that looked almost nervous. Thought you might want company, he said, and it came out like a question, like he wasn't sure of his welcome despite their phone conversations. Yeah, Anna said, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. Yeah, I'd like that. They ate together, Luca having somehow obtained actual good food, despite hospital restrictions. Pasta carbonara from a place she'd loved when they'd been together, still warm and perfect. He told her about his day in more detail than usual, about a negotiation that had gotten tense, about his nephew's birthday party that he'd attended for the first time in years, about a conversation with his mother where she'd asked about Anna, and he'd had to explain they were figuring things out. What did she say? Anna asked, genuinely curious. She'd met Luca's mother only a handful of times. The woman was formidable, traditional, and had clear opinions about appropriate behavior for women involved with men in the family business. She said if I was stupid enough to let you leave once, I better not be stupid enough to do it again. Luca replied with a slight smile. Then she invited you to Sunday dinner whenever you're ready, which in her language basically means she approves. Your mother terrifies me, Anna admitted. She terrifies everyone, Luca agreed, including me. They watched terrible television together, Luca making increasingly ridiculous commentary that had Anna laughing despite her anxiety. When visiting hours officially ended, he should have left but didn't, instead settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair and pulling out his phone to work, his presence a quiet anchor while Anna tried to sleep. She woke several times throughout the night to find him still there, sometimes working, sometimes just watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Around 3 a.m, she woke to find him asleep, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, laptop balanced precariously on his thighs. She wanted to wake him, suggest he go home and sleep properly, but something about seeing him there, rumpled and vulnerable and staying simply because she might need him, made her throat tight with emotion. Luca, she whispered, and his eyes opened immediately. instantly alert in that way that spoke to years of living where letting your guard down could be dangerous. "You should go home, sleep in an actual bed." "I'm fine here," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Your neck is going to hate you tomorrow." "Worth it." He shifted in the chair, trying to find a better position. "Go back to sleep, Anna. I'm not leaving." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too grateful for his presence to push the issue. Instead, she just watched him for a moment. This complicated man who was trying so hard to be something different from what he'd always been. "Thank you," she said softly. "For staying, for trying, for all of it." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. "There's nowhere else I want to be," he said simply, and she believed him. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that makes minutes feel like hours. Anna was prepped for surgery, wheeled through fluorescent corridors that all looked the same, transferred to the operating room where everything was chrome and machinery, and people in masks who spoke in efficient medical shorthand. The last thing she remembered before the anesthesia pulled her under was the anesthesiologist's calm voice counting backward. And somewhere in the chemical fog of consciousness fading, she thought about Luca waiting somewhere above in a room full of strangers, probably driving the nursing staff insane with his inability to sit still when things were outside his control. She woke up slowly, consciousness returning in layers. Pain first, dull and insistent in her abdomen. Then awareness of the recovery room, of monitors beeping, of a nurse checking her vitals with practiced efficiency. Then, gradually, the memory of why she was here, what had happened. The relief of knowing it had been benign. The reality of recovery ahead. The nurse told her the surgery had gone well, that Dr. Rodriguez was pleased with how everything had proceeded, that she'd be moved back to her room soon. Anna nodded through the fog of post-anesthesia confusion, trying to form coherent thoughts through the medication haze. When they finally wheeled her back to her room, Luca was there, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call the moment he saw her, crossing to her bedside with an expression that cycled rapidly through relief and concern. He looked terrible, exhausted and worried, and like he'd aged 5 years in the hours she'd been in surgery. His clothes were the same as yesterday, suggesting he'd never gone home, and there was coffee staining his shirt collar where he'd apparently been careless. But his eyes were clear and focused entirely on her, scanning her face for signs of pain or distress with an intensity that would have been overwhelming if she weren't so heavily medicated. "Hey," Anna managed, her voice coming out scratchy and weak. "Still alive." "Cristo, don't joke about that," Luca said roughly, and she realized his hands were shaking again. That same barely perceptible tremor that only appeared when his control was genuinely compromised. The surgery took longer than they said it would. Nobody came out to update me. I've been losing my mind for the last hour thinking. "I'm okay," she interrupted gently, reaching for his hand. "It's over. I'm okay." He sank into the chair beside her bed like his legs had suddenly stopped working, gripping her hand with both of his. "I've faced down armed men without flinching," he said, almost to himself. "I've been shot twice and barely reacted. But waiting for you to come out of surgery? That was the longest 4 hours of my life." "You've been shot?" Anna asked, because that was new information, something he'd never shared despite 3 years together. Luca looked startled, as if he hadn't meant to reveal that. Then something in his expression shifted. Acceptance, maybe, or resignation. "Once in the shoulder when I was 23, he said. "Some punk who thought killing me would make him respected. And once grazed across my ribs 3 years ago, which barely counts, but technically qualifies. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want you worrying about things like that. About the reality of what my life sometimes involves." "That's exactly what I meant," Anna said, exhaustion and medication making her more blunt than usual. "You got shot and didn't tell me. You kept that entire part of your reality separate. Like I was some delicate thing that couldn't handle knowing the man I loved had been in danger. How was I supposed to actually know you when you edited out everything you thought was too dark? He was quiet, absorbing that. "You're right," he said finally. "You're absolutely right. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself from having to deal with your reaction, from having to comfort you or explain or face the fact that my choices put me in danger. It was easier to just pretend that life and the life I had with you were completely separate things." "They weren't, though," Anna pointed out. "You can't compartmentalize yourself like that. Who you are in one part of your life affects who you are everywhere else. The fact that you face violence and danger professionally doesn't disappear just because you come home to me at night. I could feel it in how you held me, like you were always braced for something terrible. I could see it in how you'd startle awake from nightmares you'd never explain. Keeping me separate didn't protect me from your reality. It just meant I experienced your reality without context, without understanding, without being able to actually support you through it." She watched something move across his face. Recognition, maybe, or grief for all the ways they'd gotten it wrong before. "I'm going to fuck this up," he said quietly. "This new version where I actually let you in. I'm going to forget and default back to handling things alone. I'm going to try to protect you from things you don't need protecting from. I'm going to close down when things get too intense because that's what I've always done." "Probably," Anna agreed, too medicated to soften the truth. "And I'm going to get frustrated and impatient. I'm going to push when you need space, or withdraw when you're finally trying to open up. We're going to mess this up constantly because we're learning something neither of us knows how to do. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Not being perfect, just being willing to keep trying even when it's uncomfortable." "I've never been good at being uncomfortable," Luca admitted. "Yeah, I've noticed," Anna said with a slight smile. "But here you are anyway, sitting in a terrible hospital chair for the second night in a row, wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like you haven't slept in days. That's a start." He laughed, a short, slightly bitter sound. "This is me trying, and I look like I've been hit by a truck. Not exactly inspiring confidence in my ability to change." "Actually," Anna said, squeezing his hand weakly, "this is exactly what I need to see. Not you having it all together, not you smooth and controlled and managing everything perfectly. Just you, messy and worried and staying even when it's uncomfortable. That's the Luca I want to know." Recovery was harder than Anna had anticipated. The first few days were a blur of pain medication and nausea, of sleeping in short fragments interrupted by nurses checking vitals, of trying to find any position that didn't pull at her incisions. She'd expected to handle it stoically, to be independent and strong and prove she didn't need anyone. Instead, she found herself crying at random moments, frustrated by how weak her body felt, angry at needing help with basic things like showering or walking to the bathroom. It was humiliating and exhausting, and nothing like the smooth recovery she'd imagined. Luca was there for all of it, not hovering, not trying to manage everything, just present in ways she'd never experienced from him before. He helped her to the bathroom without making it weird, held her hair when nausea hit, sat quietly when she needed silence, and talked when she needed distraction. He brought her books from home, downloaded movies onto his tablet, smuggled in better food than the hospital offered. But more than any of that, he stayed even when things weren't pretty. He saw her at her worst, drugged and weak, and sometimes short-tempered from pain, and didn't flinch from it, didn't try to fix it, just accepted it as part of the reality of being human. On her third day post-surgery, Anna woke from a nap to find him dozing in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted at that same uncomfortable angle, dark circles prominent under his eyes. She watched him sleep for a while. This man who'd spent their entire relationship projecting invulnerability, now vulnerable in the simple act of exhausted rest. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw shadowed with several days of stubble. And there was something about seeing him disheveled that felt more intimate than any of the polished versions of himself he'd previously shown her. "You're staring," Luca said without opening his eyes, and Anna startled. "How did you know I was awake?" Your breathing changed. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze with a small smile. "You breathe differently when you're sleeping. Slower, deeper. I used to lie awake listening to it, memorizing the rhythm." Anna felt something clench in her chest. "That's maybe the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Yeah, well, don't get used to it," he replied. But there was no edge to it, just gentle self-deprecation. "I'm still figuring out how to do this whole emotional honesty thing." "You're doing better than you think," Anna said. "The old Luca would have gone home days ago, made sure I had whatever I needed but maintained appropriate distance. This version of you looks like you've been living in a hospital for a week." "That's because I have been," he admitted. "I've been showering in the staff locker room. One of the nurses took pity on me and gave me access. Pretty sure it's against policy, but apparently I'm pathetic enough that she made an exception." Anna laughed, then winced as it pulled at her incisions. "You've been showering in a hospital locker room? You, who has a bathroom in your apartment that's bigger than my entire studio?" "Yeah. Well, priorities change," Luca said with a shrug. "Turns out marble countertops and rainfall showerheads matter a lot less than being where you need me." They were quiet for a moment, but it was comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've moved past the need to fill every gap with words. Anna thought about the journey they'd been on, from their first meeting years ago at a gallery opening where he'd walked in like he owned the place, and she'd been simultaneously attracted and intimidated, through the whirlwind courtship where he'd pursued her with single-minded intensity, into the relationship that had been passionate and frustrating and ultimately insufficient, through the painful separation, and now into this strange new territory they were navigating together. It felt like they'd lived multiple lifetimes in just a few years, like they'd been a dozen different versions of themselves to each other. "What are you thinking about?" Luca asked, and she realized she'd been lost in her head for several minutes. "Us," Anna said simply. "How we got here. Whether we can actually make this work. And?" He looked genuinely anxious, like her answer mattered more than anything else. "And I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to try. That's different from before, when I wanted it to work so badly that I was willing to ignore all the ways it wasn't working. Now I'm going into this with my eyes open, knowing our history, knowing your patterns and my own. If it falls apart again, at least I'll know we gave it our best shot." "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement," Luca said dryly. "Did you want me to lie? Say I'm completely confident when I'm not?" "No," he said slowly. "Actually, I appreciate the honesty. Refreshing, even if it's not what my ego wanted to hear." Anna smiled. "See? Growth. The old Luca would have gotten defensive." "The old Luca is still very much present," he countered. "I'm just trying really hard to not let him run the show." Dr. Rodriguez discharged Anna on Friday afternoon with instructions for rest, pain management, and follow-up appointments. The idea of going home, to her small studio apartment where she'd been living alone for 6 months, felt simultaneously comforting and daunting. She'd managed before, but she'd never managed while recovering from surgery, while dealing with pain and limited mobility, and the knowledge that even simple tasks would be challenging. Pride wanted her to insist she'd be fine alone. Reality suggested that might be stupid. "I've arranged for a nurse to come by twice daily," Luca said, as they were processing discharge paperwork. "Just to check on you, help with anything you need, make sure recovery is progressing normally." Anna opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. This was exactly the kind of thing she'd resented before. Him arranging things without consulting her, making decisions about her care without asking if that's what she wanted. But was that what was happening here? or was he just trying to help? Intent mattered. She was learning, as much as action. "Did you hire a nurse?" she asked carefully. "Or are you offering to hire a nurse?" Luca paused, clearly thinking about the distinction. "I called the agency and got information," he said after a moment. "But I haven't actually hired anyone yet. I was going to ask if that's something you'd want, but I realize how it sounded, like I'd already made the decision." Old habits. Old habits, Anna agreed. "But you caught yourself, which is what matters. And yes, actually, I think I would like having someone check on me. As long as it's not some 24-hour situation where I feel monitored. Just someone to help with the things I can't manage alone." They negotiated the details. A nurse twice daily for the first week, then once daily for the second week, then reassess based on how recovery was going. It felt like a small victory, this collaborative decision-making, this treating her as an equal participant rather than someone to be managed. When they finally left the hospital, Anna moving slowly with Luca's arm steady around her waist, she felt hopeful in ways she hadn't expected. Not naively optimistic, but cautiously, realistically hopeful that maybe they could actually be different this time. The drive to her apartment was quiet, Anna dozing against the window while Luca navigated traffic. She woke when the car stopped, realizing with some surprise that they weren't at her studio in Brooklyn. Instead, they were in front of Luca's building in Manhattan, the doorman already approaching to open her door. Anna looked at Luca questioningly, and he had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Before you get angry," he started, "hear me out. Your apartment is a 4th-floor walk-up. No elevator. Stairs are going to be brutal for the next couple weeks. My apartment has an elevator, a guest room where you can recover without navigating stairs, and a housekeeper who can help with things the nurse can't. I'm not asking you to move back in with me. The guest room is yours, completely separate space, and I'll give you total privacy. I'm asking you to let me help in a way that's actually helpful, rather than making recovery harder because of pride." Anna wanted to argue. Every independent instinct in her body wanted to insist she'd manage the stairs, that she didn't need luxury accommodations to heal, that accepting this was somehow a step backward. But her incisions hurt. She was exhausted, and the thought of climbing 4 flights of stairs multiple times a day for the next 2 weeks sounded genuinely awful. Sometimes she was learning. Accepting help wasn't weakness. It was just being practical. "Guest room," she said firmly, "with a lock on the door, and this is temporary, just until I can handle stairs again." "Absolutely," Luca agreed, and if he was relieved, he hid it well. "Guest room has its own bathroom, its own space. You won't even know I'm there unless you want to." They made it upstairs, Luca supporting most of her weight as they moved from car to elevator to apartment. The guest room was beautiful in that understated way that came from expensive interior designers: cream walls, comfortable furniture, large windows overlooking the city. It was also, Anna noticed, stocked with her favorite books from her apartment, her preferred tea in the kitchenette, photographs she'd had on her bedside table. Luca must have gone to her place while she was in the hospital, collecting things he knew would make her comfortable. It was thoughtful in ways he'd rarely managed before, this anticipation of her needs without being overbearing about it. "Thank you," Anna said quietly, settling carefully onto the bed. This is really nice. I appreciate it." "Get some rest," Luca said, lingering in the doorway. "I have some calls to make for work, but I'll check on you in a couple hours. Text if you need anything before then." He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Anna lay back against the pillows, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. She was in Luca's apartment, in his space, accepting his help, all things she'd sworn she wouldn't do when she'd left 6 months ago. But somehow it felt different this time, less like surrender and more like choice. He'd offered, she'd accepted, and there were clear boundaries around what that meant. Maybe that was the key, not avoiding all the old patterns, but approaching them consciously, with awareness and agreed-upon terms, rather than falling into them by default. The first week of recovery passed in a haze of medication and sleep, of the nurse checking her healing incisions, and Luca appearing at intervals with food or entertainment, or sometimes just quiet company. Anna spent most of her time in the guest room, reading and watching movies and occasionally venturing into the main living space when she felt strong enough. Luca kept his promise about giving her space, never entering without permission, never acting like her presence in his apartment meant anything beyond practical recuperation assistance. But he also made it clear he was available, leaving his office door open so she could hear him on calls, appearing in the kitchen when she emerged looking for tea, maintaining a presence that was supportive without being suffocating. What surprised Anna most was how domestic it all felt, not in the carefully curated way their previous life together had been. No staff arranging flowers or preparing elaborate meals, no performance of luxury. Instead, it was small, real things. Luca attempting to make pasta carbonara from memory and completely botching it, both of them laughing at the inedible result before ordering takeout. Late-night conversations when Anna couldn't sleep because of pain. Luca appearing in rumpled pajama pants to sit with her until the medication kicked in. Him working at the kitchen table rather than his office so she wouldn't feel isolated in the guest room. Her catching him singing off-key to music while making coffee, immediately stopping with embarrassed awareness when he noticed her watching. These tiny moments of unguarded reality that had been completely absent from their previous relationship. "I'm learning things about you I never knew," Anna said one night when they were watching a movie together, her curled carefully on one end of the couch, him on the other with deliberate space between them. "Like the fact that you sing in Italian when you think nobody's listening, and you're terrible at it." "I'm not terrible," Luca protested. "I'm just enthusiastic." "You're enthusiastically off-key," Anna corrected with a smile. "It's actually kind of endearing." "Endearing," he repeated, looking mock-offended. "I'm a powerful man, Anna. I have a reputation. I can't be endearing." "Too late," she said. "I've seen you struggle with carbonara and sing bad Italian pop music. The mystique is gone." He laughed, and there was something open in it, something unguarded she'd rarely seen before. "Good," he said. "I'm tired of mystique. It's exhausting, constantly maintaining this image of having everything under control." "You do have a lot under control, though," Anna pointed out. "Your business, your people, your entire operation. That's not fake." "No," Luca agreed. "But it's also not the whole picture. The parts you're seeing now, the mess and the uncertainty and the moments I don't know what I'm doing, those are real too. I just spent a lot of energy hiding them before, thinking that if you saw the human parts, you'd lose respect for the powerful parts." "That's backwards, though," Anna said gently. "The human parts make the powerful parts more impressive. Anyone can project confidence when everything's easy. Being vulnerable while also being strong, that actually takes courage." He was quiet, absorbing that. They watched the movie for a while in comfortable silence, and Anna felt something settling in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but peace. This was what she'd wanted, what she'd been asking for all along. Not perfection, not even dramatic change, just willingness to let her see all of him. Messy and complicated and sometimes struggling. It wasn't revolutionary, it was just real. And real, she was discovering, was so much better than the polished fantasy they'd performed before. By the second week, Anna was moving better, requiring less medication, starting to feel more like herself. The nurse came once daily now instead of twice, and Anna had graduated to taking short walks around the neighborhood with Luca steadying her elbow. They fell into something resembling a routine. Mornings where he'd make terrible coffee that they'd both drink anyway. Afternoons where she'd read while he worked. Evenings where they'd cook together or order in and watch movies or just talk, really talk, about things that mattered. Their relationship had never been boring, but it had been intense in ways that left little room for ordinary companionship. This was different, quieter, more sustainable, built on daily presence rather than dramatic gestures. "I've been thinking about therapy," Luca said one evening while they were cooking, or more accurately, while he was attempting to follow her instructions on making chicken piccata and only moderately succeeding. "Not couples therapy yet, though that too eventually, but individual therapy for me, to work through some of the shit that makes vulnerability so difficult." Anna looked up from where she was monitoring the pasta, surprised and impressed. "That's a big step." "Yeah, well, I'm tired of being emotionally stunted," he said with a wry smile. "And I figure if I'm asking you to give this another chance, I should probably do the actual work to be someone worthy of that chance. Can't just rely on good intentions and hope I figure it out through trial and error." "I think that's really healthy," Anna said honestly. "And brave." "I know how you feel about therapy." Luca had made his opinions about therapy clear during their previous relationship, that it was self-indulgent, that real men handled their problems alone, that talking to strangers about feelings was a waste of time and money. These were opinions inherited from his father, she knew, part of the old-school mentality that treated any emotional processing as weakness. Hearing him now, voluntarily suggesting he needed professional help, spoke to how seriously he was taking this commitment to change. "I feel about therapy the way my father taught me to feel about it," Luca corrected, "which is probably a sign I need it. Lots of things my father taught me were survival skills for his generation, but might not be healthy for mine. The world's different now. Or maybe it's not. But I want to be different in it." They finished cooking together, the meal imperfect but edible, and sat at his kitchen table eating and talking about therapy options, about what he might want to work on, about Anna's own experiences with counseling after leaving him. It felt mature and thoughtful, this conversation about getting help, about acknowledging limitations and seeking tools to address them. It felt like something people who were serious about making a relationship work would do, rather than just hoping love would be sufficient to overcome all obstacles. "When do you think you'll go back to your apartment?" Luca asked, and there was something careful in how he phrased it, like he was trying to ask without pressure. Anna thought about it. She was healing well, probably could manage stairs at this point with minimal difficulty. Her lease was still active, her things waiting in Brooklyn, her independent life ready to resume. But she wasn't sure she wanted to rush back to it, wasn't sure what message that would send about where things stood between them. They'd been existing in this strange liminal space, not quite together, not quite separate, testing out what a different version of their relationship might look like. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Part of me wants my own space back, wants to prove I can still manage independently. But part of me kind of likes this, being here, with you, without all the pressure of officially being in a relationship, like we're in this trial period where we're figuring out if we work without committing to anything permanent yet." "So stay," Luca said simply. "Keep the guest room as long as you want it. There's no timeline, no expectation. Just two people who care about each other, living in proximity, seeing if proximity can coexist with honesty and respect and space." "You're really okay with that?" Anna asked. "With me being here but not being yours in the way I was before?" "I don't want to own you, Anna," Luca said, and there was something raw in his voice. "I did before, or at least I acted like I did. You were mine, my woman, my responsibility, my possession. That's how I'd been taught to think about relationships. You claim something beautiful, you protect it, you keep it. But you're not something to be kept. You're a person making choices, and I'd rather have you here, separate and independent, than not have you in my life at all, because I couldn't handle you not being under my control." It was possibly the most emotionally intelligent thing he'd ever said to her. This recognition that their previous dynamic had been fundamentally flawed. That love without autonomy wasn't actually love at all. Anna felt tears threatening and blinked them back, reaching across the table to take his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and solid and real. "Okay," she said. "Then I'll stay for now. In the guest room, living my own life, but here. And we'll see where that takes us." The weeks that followed felt like discovering a new person who somehow looked exactly like the old person she'd known. Luca went to his first therapy session and came home looking emotionally wrung out, but somehow lighter. They had dinner together most nights, sometimes cooking, sometimes ordering in, occasionally going to quiet restaurants where nobody knew them and they could just be a couple learning each other. He showed her parts of his work she'd never seen before. Not the dangerous parts, but the business strategy, the negotiations, the complex decisions that went into running his organization. She showed him her art, the passion project she'd been developing at the gallery, dreams about eventually curating her own shows. They fought sometimes, small arguments about household things or misunderstandings that required clearing up, but they fought productively, talking through issues rather than Luca shutting down or Anna withdrawing. One Saturday morning, nearly a month after her surgery, Anna woke to find Luca in the kitchen attempting to make breakfast. She watched from the doorway, amused and touched by the concentration on his face as he tried to flip pancakes without mangling them. He was in sweatpants and a worn t-shirt, his hair unstyled and falling across his forehead, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. When he finally noticed her watching, he smiled. Not the controlled, measured smile he'd perfected for business, but something genuine and slightly embarrassed. "I'm destroying these," he admitted, gesturing at the slightly burnt, oddly shaped pancakes. "But I'm determined to make you a decent breakfast at least once before you decide I'm hopeless." "You're not hopeless," Anna said, moving to stand beside him. "Just inexperienced. Nobody taught you this stuff." "My mother tried," Luca said. "But my father thought cooking was women's work, and I believed him. Add that to the list of toxic shit I'm unlearning." They made breakfast together, Anna guiding him through the process, their hands occasionally bumping in the shared space of the kitchen. It was domestic and ordinary, and perfect in its simplicity. When they finally sat down to eat, the pancakes imperfect but edible, Luca looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" Anna asked. "I'm happy," he said simply. "Right now, in this moment, eating mediocre pancakes with you in my kitchen. I don't think I understood what happiness was before. I thought it was power or success or having beautiful things. But this, just this, nothing dramatic or expensive. This is what it actually feels like." Anna felt her heart clench with affection and hope and residual caution all tangled together. "This is what I wanted," she said quietly. "Not the penthouse or the luxury or the performance of a perfect life. Just real moments with a real person who lets me actually know them." "Then that's what we'll keep building," Luca said. "Real moments. Imperfect pancakes. Honest conversations. Whatever that looks like, wherever it leads." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and Anna thought about journeys and destinations, about how sometimes you have to leave something completely to find your way back to it differently. She'd left Luca because she'd loved him, and it hadn't been enough. Because love without emotional honesty is just mutual performance. But maybe, just maybe, they'd found their way to something different now. Something built on vulnerability and choice and daily presence rather than passion and control and expensive gestures. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined, but it was real. And real, she was learning, was so much more valuable than perfect ever could be.